Welcome to the Paris Peace Forum panel discussion on the role of clean hydrogen in bridging the climate gap. Clean hydrogen is a major ingredient needed to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 and to control climate change that is unfolding in front of our eyes. That has been made possible by increasingly cheaper renewable energy feeding electrolyzers. But most of the hydrogen used today are still produced from fossil fuel. In order to fill that gap, over the past year alone, hundreds of projects were announced to expand the use of clean hydrogen across many industries, such as mobility, power, steel, cement, mining, and so on. My name is Hitomi Komachi, joining you today from Allen & Overy, Tokyo. I'm a lawyer specialized in energy, natural resources, and infrastructure, and our clients around the world increasingly highlight the expectation on the role of hydrogen and clean hydrogen in the coming years. Together with my colleague Arthur Sauzet from Allen & Overy Paris, we're both keen members of our firm's Global Hydrogen Interest Group and are very much honored to moderate this discussion, joined here by our esteemed speakers and experts in this field. So first, we have Dr. Uwe Rem from the International Energy Agency. He's the head of Hydrogen and Alternative Fuels Unit and leads the energy supply analysis. He is the lead author behind a number of IEA publications. Second, we have Mr. Mathieu Gia from Air Liquide, a member of a group executive committee leading hydrogen and industrial merchant activities. And third, we have Mr. Masaru Yamazaki from Sumitomo Corporation, leading a number of Sumitomo's low-carbon hydrogen projects in Asia-Pacific and beyond. So each of the speakers and institutions here are champions of hydrogen, and we'll hear more about their activities in this session. So this is a 45-minute panel discussion. We'll start with the first round of questions centered around each of the speakers' activities, in each of the institutions' role in the emerging clean hydrogen world. We'll then move on to the second round of questions, where speakers are invited to share their views and comments on others' views as well. And finally, we'll turn to questions from the audience. So for those of you at the venue or listening in, please do provide your questions in the Q&A chat box. So with that housekeeping done, Arthur, let's kick off on the questions.
Many thanks, Hitomi. Well, so let's turn to our panelists for a round of introductory questions. Maybe first, let's turn to you, Dr. Remme. So help us set the scene here. So first of all, what is clean hydrogen from your perspective? How is it different from the way we make hydrogen today? And most importantly, why is clean hydrogen indispensable for helping bridging the climate gap? How is it going to help us on the march towards the objective of net zero?
Hydrogen. I guess many people don't know that hydrogen is being used today in the chemical industry and refining. So we're using today around 90 million tons of hydrogen globally. The problem is that this hydrogen today is produced from fossil fuels. So it's creating emissions of around almost 900 million tons of CO2 per year, which roughly corresponds to the annual CO2 emissions of the UK and Indonesia combined. In the future, if we really want to see that hydrogen contributes to reaching our net zero goals, it has to be produced from clean sources on a clean way. So it means, for example, that hydrogen can be produced from renewable electricity through water electrolyzers. The other option to produce hydrogen is to equip or to combine fossil fuel hydrogen production with CO2 capture and storage, and that will reduce the CO2 emissions from using these fossil fuels for hydrogen production. So using the renewable electricity is something also often referred to as green hydrogen. Using fossil fuels in combination with CO2 capture and storage is also referred as blue hydrogen. And if you look at the role of hydrogen in the future energy system, there are particular areas where other mitigation options are either more difficult or more costly to reduce emissions. So there we talk particularly about long distance transport, like aviation, shipping, trucks, but also heavy industries like iron and steel making, where actually molecules are really needed in the production process of these industrial sectors. So there hydrogen can play a big role. And in that context, it's quite encouraging also to see the recent announcement that we've seen for aviation and shipping at COP26, that countries are planning to work together to decarbonize these sectors, and hydrogen-based fuels in the form of ammonia or synthetic hydrocarbon fuels will play an important role helping to reduce emissions in these sectors.
That's great. And hydrogen has really been seen as you've set out how it's got a systemic impact on many areas of our world and industry. And hydrogen really is an indispensable part of the energy strategy in many countries, including in Japan. So Yamazaki-san, Sumitomo Corporation, as a leading trading company in the world, is putting really your money where your mouth is by pursuing multiple hydrogen projects worldwide. And in looking at these activities, regional cooperation seems to be a key theme coming out. So please tell us about what regional cooperation means to you and the projects that Sumitomo is working on that exemplify this.
Hitomi, thank you very much. As you mentioned, the regional relation is very, very important. The reason why is I do believe that hydrogen, the reason why we are facing the challenge to unlock the investment of the hydrogen is because we have to reduce the cost. But to reduce the cost, we need a scale up. To go for the scale up, we have to create the demand based on the scale, which will be leading to the sector coupling. And these kind of the collaboration will be needed. But if you see as a science fact, there are some gaps, as you said, viability gap. And if there's no viability on the project or even with the business, nothing will happen. And so about our stance, focusing on my project on Australia, we are engaging both with Australia government and Japanese government. And from the industry side, together with our industry partners, we are totally focusing about how to reduce the cost by scaling up, but also create the demand on Japan side so that we could make the supply chain. It is like kind of the LNG style. But the reason why we need the relations both on industry and also about the government is the how to fill in the gap. This is just a very simple and the challenge and also the critical path. Like for example, in Japan, we already have launched the hydrogen strategies, basic strategies, which is targeting $3 per kilogram hydrogen by 2030, CIF base in Japan. So it will be like $1.5 per kilogram hydrogen by X-Works from the production side. But even though we achieve this, and if we compare with the LNG as a price right now, it is already, there's still a gap of 3 to 4 times higher, even though we reach $3. It means that to fill in this gap, if we could have like kind of the CO2 incentives, like 45Q in United States, like emission trading systems in EU, these kind of the CO2 incentive is one of the challenge. So this is the reason why I see, even though from the project, that we should focus more about the relationship, especially not only with the industry partner, but also with the government.
Thank you very much. Let's turn to you, Mr. Giard. So you're one of the key players involved in the clean hydrogen transition. Tell us a bit more about Air Liquide strategy, the international perspective. Help us go through the types of project, the varieties of flavors of hydrogen involved in this transition.
Thank you, Arthur. So actually at Air Liquide, our journey started more than 50 years ago in hydrogen. We started using hydrogen as a fuel in the special industry. And since then, we have built the entire value chain and the techno solutions that are needed for hydrogen to be available at industrial scale. Dr. Raymond mentioned it, and today it's mostly what we call gray hydrogen, but we have a clear commitment to move towards low carbon or renewable hydrogen. And to do so, we've been pioneering with others a couple of technologies over the last few years. And we operate today 40 electrolyzers worldwide. We are running the largest electrolyzers in Canada, in Bécancour today. It's 20 megawatts. And we have already announced the largest worldwide, biggest one that will be in production by 2023 in France of 200 megawatts. We have 70 more and more hydrogen refueling stations in operations worldwide, but we are also operating a very large liquefier of hydrogen in Nevada in order to feed the California market in the US. And we are building the largest one in Korea, which is going to be 90 tons a day. Another element that is important is that we have our technology around carbon capture. It was mentioned, I think it's going to be absolutely key in the decarbonization path if we want this hydrogen to play its role in the transition. So as you see, the technologies exist, they are ready to be scaled up. At Air Liquide, we have committed to invest more than 8 billion euros of our capital by 2030 in order to reach our 2050 carbon neutrality commitment. Then if we stick a little bit to what we do and how we see our strategies going, Dr. Raymond mentioned it, hydrogen has a key role to play in many aspects of the industry chain. Just to put it simply, we see three buckets. One is hydrogen as an energy carrier in order to move energy from one continent to the other, or to buffer energy on a system. The second big one that we really want to focus on is how to abate sectors. And in these activities, hydrogen is not always an energy carrier. In the green chemistry space, we produce green hydrogen as a key component of the hydrocarbon chain that can be rebuilt. For the refiners, hydrogen is used to desulfurize their fuel or to add to the renewable content of their e-fuels or synthetic fuels going down the road. In the steel industry, hydrogen is used as a reductor for the iron ore. So you see that it's, I think, too easy to link hydrogen and energy. There are many, many other use cases. The other and the third one that we focus on is clearly transportation. The bigger, the better. When you look at refilling time, cargo space, distance, we believe that for heavy duty trucks, trains, and maybe aviation one day, hydrogen will have a key role to play. So when we put all of that together, it gives a pretty positive outlook for us, not only to decarbonize our own assets, which is absolutely critical, but also to offer solutions to the industry in the years to come.
Many thanks, Mathieu. So the scene is set. Now let's open the table for discussions among our panelists. So we're here at the forum with a strong focus, obviously, on multilateral solutions. And when it comes to hydrogen, I think one of the first topics we'd like to open the discussion to is the question of public-private cooperation. And I'd like to turn maybe first to Yamazaki-san, but then, of course, the other panelists can chip in whenever they want. Because Yamazaki-san, you're, I think, the representative of Sumitomo Corporation to the Hydrogen Council, an important institution for public-private cooperation. Can you tell us a little bit more about the role of the Hydrogen Council, and maybe more generally about how you see cooperation globally between public and private stakeholders? Is it working well? What should we do better?
Okay, thank you very much. About our role or our position in Hydrogen Council is we are one of the supporting member, but we are also the member of the Hydrogen Marketplace project teams. This the previous name was Finance Project Team, but what we were discussing is how to unlock the investment of the hydrogen project, which is already on the table. In the council, Hydrogen Council, we have also identified 491 flagship project, which is already on the table. But all this project, inside of this project teams, what we are discussing is each project have different colors. The reason why is each region have the different stance and also about the roles, how they see about hydrogen as decarbonizing of the key vectors, or even though as the decarbonization to replace the energy transitions for both on power or transportations. But each project, since they have the different colors, we also identify that each region have to focus more strongly to focus what will be the best configurations, not talking as a global, but focusing as the areas. About Hydrogen Council, there's already 124 members, and we are discussing based on this project teams. But Hydrogen Council is also aligning with the regional hydrogen alliance, such as Japan Hydrogen Association, which was established last year, and also like Hydrogen Europe, talking about the certification and including how to unlock the green hydrogen together. So I do believe that the alliance of this Hydrogen Council, as 124 leaders are joining, I think this is a very good platform to make like kind of the one voice, so that we could also discuss this with the other policymaker, I should say the right policymaker. But about this activities, I do believe it is still under the process, which we have to define more together with our members and also with the partners.
So, Mr. Giard, Air Liquide is also a core member of the Hydrogen Council, and so I'd be interested to hear your views on that, on what Yamazaki-san has said, but also in the context of challenges that you see in your business. That the many strands of hydrogen business that you outlined. So, I'd be very interested to hear your views on this.
Thank you, Toshi. So I guess before looking at where we are going, it's important to look at where we are today. In 18 months, the world of hydrogen has completely changed, and we moved from advocacy all the way to a real political support, with a lot of countries realizing that hydrogen has a key element to play in this net zero strategy. 2020 was all about defining strategies at country level, and we saw a lot, and we have more than 30 countries that have today established hydrogen strategies with appropriate funding. And 2021 is all about the scale up and this implementation. So we mentioned the 45Q in the US, Fit for 55 in Europe is a very systemic and global answer. In Asia, things are moving a lot, so we see a lot of traction. That being said, in many cases, those projects still lack the proper conditions to get decided by their promoters, whether it be for economical, regulatory reasons, or simply due to a lack of market visibilities. And I believe that's where industrial companies and governments need to collaborate very effectively to waive these hurdles and accelerate the deployment of hydrogen globally around two themes: policy frameworks and development of hydrogen ecosystems. So if we start with the policy framework, we need to build systemic strategies both for private and policymakers, including regulations, financing, support schemes to foster both the supply and demand and accelerate, and we mentioned it already, the decrease of the cost of hydrogen on the cost curve. So it's very essential for government to provide much more certainty for investors by reducing the policy and regulatory risk. No investor is going to make a decision without visibility on the long term. So beyond the long-term decarbonization project or hydrogen strategy that have a window of 2040, 2050, this calls for setting ambitious yet achievable intermediary objectives in different sectors that are binding. I think that's what is very, very key, binding in nature, pushing the stakeholders to accelerate their investments while securing them further with a clear and stable transition roadmap. So we can mention here quotas for fuel cell electrical vehicles, contract for different, CO2 reduction mandate. I mean, you name it, all of that, again, is shaping the system and is putting some binding objectives. The second piece is to make sure that when a country think of their hydrogen strategy, they look at the global system. They need to leverage their local strength. They need to look at their ecosystem locally, infrastructure, abundant energy. It's very obvious that Japan is not Chile and that Australia is not Korea. But at the same time, we need to look at solid projection of the future hydrogen trade flows in the region and at global scale. And finally, on the policy side, these policy packages needs to make sure that we manage the complexity of the hydrogen value chain through sets of policies that are acting on the whole supply chain, upstream to downstream, cross sectors, in a fully synchronized manner. And we have that tendency from time to time to see desynchronization between all of that. So some countries are doing it very well. We mentioned Korea, Japan. Definitely we can go one step further, but we need to bring that forward as industries to more countries and more policymakers. The second piece of the question for me is this development of hydrogen ecosystems. First of all, what we need is an international certification system of hydrogen. If we want to move this energy carrier from one part of the world to the other, we need to be sure of the entire system. We need to have guarantees of origin. We need to measure the same things related to the carbon content of these energy carriers. It doesn't exist today. Europe is moving. Some other part of the world are moving. At one point, we're going to have to synchronize all of that to discuss and to align. We need public and private governance. Itoshi mentioned some of it. So the Hydrogen Council is playing a key role into that, talking to Europe, talking to other policymakers. It's absolutely key. Another piece that we control us, private companies, is cooperations between private companies and the financing systems. So you saw that hydrogen is a world of announcements and partnerships. We see them every day in the news. We need to find our space. We need to find our spot in the entire value chain. And private companies, we can do that together, and we can create the finance ecosystems around that. We have, for example, Air Liquide announced hydrogen, our participation to the first hydrogen clean fund that has a goal to raise 1.5 billion euros by next year. And it will give us, with the leverage that we'll have, the potential to play with 10 to 15 billion euros of budget to develop some projects. And last but not least, we need to make sure that we embark NGOs, experts, engineers, in order to make sure that our discussions are sound from a technical and social standpoint.
Thanks, Mathieu. Okay, so you do have a number of recommendations to move forward on the international stage. We're getting questions from the audience, but we'll keep that for later for now, because I'd like to turn to you, Dr. Remme, again. I mean, when we think about hydrogen and where it needs to be in 10 years to play its role in the net zero objective, I have in mind also the example of renewables over the last 20 years, which in a way was much more simple because yes, you have to transport like the wind turbines across the world, but here we have to build a whole ecosystem, a whole global hydrogen economy, being able to move hydrogen around all across the world eventually. That's going to be very complicated. So from your vantage point at the IEA, I mean, it's a unique vantage point. You've been publishing reports for a number of years, including last year, with a number of recommendations, I reckon, about what we should do on the global stage to move towards this global hydrogen economy. So maybe take us through your main recommendations. Are you aligned with Mr. Giard on what we need to do on the priorities? What are recommendations of the IEA at this stage?
Yeah, thank you. That's your first question. I mean, if you look at particularly the aspect of international collaboration, I would maybe like to stress here two areas where collaboration between countries, but of course also with industries are important. One area is, of course, we see now a lot of projects, demonstration projects being moved forward, being implemented. So we see the scale up of electrolyzers for green hydrogen happening. And that's quite encouraging, but we shouldn't forget that there are also technology areas or sectors where we need in the future, if we really are serious about reaching net zero in the future, and if we want to decarbonize sectors like aviation and shipping, that some of these technologies, for example, we talk about synthetic kerosene for airplanes, that these technologies are still at an earlier development stage. So there's more research, development, demonstration projects needed. And I guess it's one area where countries can work together, pooling resources, and that way share the burden of further developing these technologies. Particularly if we talk about demonstration projects, they're often quite capital intensive, so quite expensive. And their collaboration can help between countries, also with industries, so that way also reducing the investment risks for the different participants or partners in these projects. And the second area of collaboration, of course, was also mentioned by Mathieu, is if you're looking at the opportunities that international trade of hydrogen can bring in the future. So we've got there countries where hydrogen is needed to decarbonize sectors, but the domestic resources are quite limited. For example, I guess we see it in countries, for example, some European countries, but also if you look at Japan, Korea, and then there are areas which have actually excellent renewable resources or access to cheap or low cost fossil fuels and also CO2 storage potentials. So that opportunities, or that's opening an opportunity for international trade in hydrogen. And to make this happen, as also mentioned already by Mathieu, it's of course important also to be clear what we are actually talking about when we're talking about low carbon or clean hydrogen. So it's so there needs to be a kind of commonly agreed accounting standard. How do we define the carbon footprint of hydrogen? Then we have to agree on standards. So what should be the threshold of how we define then what's low carbon hydrogen, and finally one also needs to put in place certification systems so that these processes are being monitored and tracked. What's really what low carbon hydrogen actually then means if partners are trading hydrogen. So I guess that would be our areas I see where international collaboration is quite critical to support the upscale of low carbon hydrogen on the production side, but also on using it.
Thank
Maybe
you,
just
Dr.
staying on this question of clean hydrogen, the definition, maybe like Mr. Gia, would you agree, for example, with Yamazaki-san on what is clean hydrogen today? Do we have a common definition, and what should that definition be?
I was going to rebound on what Uwe said. I think we have to be agnostic and we have to be good engineers. If you want to decarbonize the world, I mean, it's going to go to electrification. And I think that should be a focus of the main players. Whatever can be directly decarbonized makes sense. And then you have the use cases that we mentioned. And here, basically, several technologies are at stake. I mentioned PEM, proton exchange membrane, earlier. There are others that have a lower technological readiness level that we need to promote. All of that eventually, in order to bring us to 2030, 2035, I don't know exactly when, where basically low carbon or green hydrogen will be at par with the hydrogen that we can produce today, the gray one out of fossil fuels. But again, to do so, these technologies will be ready based on two parameters. One is a drastic reduction of the capex. And to reduce that capex, we need projects. So in order to justify gigafactories of electrolyzers, and then we are back to our square one, is that it's time to scale up so we can justify projects and investment. The other piece is that to run these electrolyzers, we're going to need massive quantities of renewable energy, solar, wind, hydro, and you name it, in order to run our electrolyzers and produce this green hydrogen. In the meantime, because again, we are not there on the capex curve, and this available energy is not always there in all the countries. I think we have to be pragmatic and agnostic and look at carbon capture. In order to move and to scale up, we need to capture up to 95% of the carbon that is produced out of this steam methane reformer that are producing more than 95% of the hydrogen that is used in the world today. So I think we need to collaborate on, again, three things, new technologies and push them, scale up in order to reduce the cost of capex and making sure that we have an outlet for this product. And in the meantime, but it can only be on a transitory period, capture this CO2 in order to keep operating and to move down the road of decarbonization of the entire hydrogen value chain.
Yamazaki-san,
So
you agree?
new
Let's be
technology.
agnostic. Oh, sorry.
So I think your question was about definition about clean hydrogen. So
Right.
I do believe that what kind of the discussion we are doing about like blue or green. I do believe this discussion is still, well, each actors or player always have the different view because there are some player, like for example, electrolyzer vendor will definitely say green, and they have the ambitious target. Going back to the oil major, for example, and as Mr. Gia also mentioned, coupling with CCS could make the scale and try to cost down. That is also the true. But I do believe the answer itself is always on the each project. As I mentioned, each region have each different trend, and each project have each different colors. So I just want to share about what I'm doing on Australia because I have one project on the blue hydrogen and one in green. About the blue one, it is a flagship project which also supported from the Australia and Japan. We call the Hydrogen Energy Supply Chain Project. We say HASC. This HASC project had been launched from 2015, and we have made this pilot demonstrations to show during this Tokyo Olympic that we just finished. Unfortunately, about the ship was already launched as a liquefied hydrogen. I think it's the first and the only at end of 2019, and it is ready. We are now preparing to be ready by this year or early next year to fill in about the hydrogen, which we will produce from the massive unused resource we call lignite. Lignite, but different lignite with Europe. With 60% moisture, it means that that's the reason why it is unused. There will be a lot of CO2, but about this project, this is like kind of the area that God brings some gift because there's also a massive saline aquifer and also about the depleted oil and gas. So there's also the about like 31 gigatons of CCS potential just right beside about this unused mining resources. So about this project, what we can say is um, the technology itself is almost all proven. Like, for example, the key technology of gasification, this is led by J-Power, which is our partner. They already made the same size or even the bigger, which is already operated in Japan's Osaki coolgen. So we can use this as the gasifications. About liquefaction, this is also the part that we have to collaborate with our partner and also maybe with the international like Linde or Air Product or even the Air Liquid. But if there will be the scale up, yes, this will be definitely ready so that we can bring the hydrogen with $3 per kilogram hydrogen by 2030. About this blue hydrogen, what we could see is we could scale up, and it is like a petrochemical. So from the engineering fact, we can reduce by scale up. And if the scale will be bigger, we can reduce more than 3 to 2. I'm talking about CIF, and usually when everybody talk like 111 in United States, or even the H2 under 2 in Australia, they always talk about hydrogen production costs from the production side. So if I convert this to HASC, it will be 1.5, including the CCS. So I think this is one of the things. But another project about the Gladstone hydrogen ecosystem, we are now focusing how to create the demand in regions so that we could see and define about the potential of two things, about the production volume of the hydrogen and also about the production cost of this green hydrogen. And we have started this feasible study from 2018. And what we see is green is still expensive, higher expensive than blue. I do understand there's an ambitious target like kilowatt $500 with $20 of megawatt hour of the electricity, then we can reach less than $2 per kilogram hydrogen. And if you just put it on the model, that is right. But from our experience, we see that this figure of 500 is just coming from the vendor, like ITM Power, like the Cummins and other vendors, that they are trying to target by 2025 or 2026. But this is X-Works. X-Works for only for the electrolyzer. I see. What I see is it will be over like $3,000 kilowatt if you turn as a full turnkey, and even though the electricity price will be zero, it means that it will be over $4 per kilogram hydrogen. That's the reason why I see that green needs more, I should say, scale up with the re-engineering to coupling about the balance of plant. The price and the cost is not only about the price that we will get from the vendor. We have to compile this putting with engineering, compiling with the other balance of plant, and it depends on the demand, but of course like the tanks and the pipes, compressors, with the civil and installations. you can see that this price will be raising, but nobody have talked. So this is one of the things from our project. What we see is starting with blue to achieve the safe and stable and affordable hydrogen, so that this could unlock about the investing to the hydrogen infrastructure, which will open the door of the hydrogen economy. So this is the
Thank
thing
you,
that we are
Yamazaki-san.
discussing. We are not talking about green or blue, yes.
Thank you, Yamazaki-san, for setting out the different types of hydrogen and that how that is actually required in order to scale up. And that's very interesting to compare the different regions' approaches on this because, for example, in France there were there are attempts to define low carbon hydrogen, etc., and that is very much driven by the hydrogen user and the users, the jurisdiction and the country's perspective as well. But turning back on to what is very much the topic of this week, which is COP26, one question from the audience is around your views on COP26 and how that will impact on your hydrogen business or hydrogen efforts. Does anyone want to take that question?
Maybe I can start if you want. To me, as I mentioned, it's all about binding commitments. If we want things to move, we need binding commitments in the system, and we need a push, a regulatory or policy push, in order to move both supply and demand at the same time. Consumer will have to end up paying. Private companies will have to produce low carbon products, and producers will have to supply this need, and they will have to be held to a certain extent by policymakers in order to bridge the funding gap in the very short term. So COP26 looks to be a bit disappointing for the timing. So let's look what's going to be the conclusions tomorrow. Couple of good progresses. We mentioned methane. We mentioned the maritime industry. We mentioned the transportation industry. Again, the more the sectors move and the more they commit to binding components, I think the better for the entire ecosystem. So to me, if there is one message out of it, it's time to scale up. And to make sure that we synchronize at the same time supply, demand, and technology in order to have a chance to be on this 2-degree curve, not even to mention the 1.51. So I hope that, again, all of these players are going to commit and to bind themselves.
We're getting another question from the audience, which is, could you each of you elaborate on the potential of a partnership between private companies and the financial sector to speed up decarbonization of economies? So we've touched upon this subject, but I mean, we're going to need like tons of money to help finance all of this transition. So how is it going to work? Do you think that it's already working well? Do you see like interest from the financial sector? What are the levers, including an international stage, so that capital can be invested in these projects? Who wants to try this?
Well, then I will just briefly touch upon about the partnership between the industry and finance. As I mentioned during the finance project team and investor day of the Hydrogen Council, which was held in Karuiza at June 2019, there were many finance institutions. And like Europe, for example, creating as an infrastructure fund, this is running, and I do believe this is a good progress. But if we go back to the commercial banks, they are also suffering about how to proceed. The reason why is how to gain the project viability to get the collateral for their returning based on the debt. So this is still like kind of the same challenge that like us who is focusing to unlock the investment and develop the project. I think we have the common challenge right now. So that's the reason why from the industry side, as Mr. Jihad said, I really totally agree about the scaling up to reduce the cost. And to reduce the scaling up, we have to make the demand creations. But how to fill in the gap? We have to also discuss with the industry partners and the people, including the finance institutions, to contact to the right person on the policymaker side. I think that this approach is the approach that we have to focus, and it is very easy if we could focus by the project.
Thank you for that, Yamazaki-san. And to an extent, that the financing community is also looking towards progress on how to penalize fossil fuel and greenhouse gas emitting sources, but also incentivizing green energy, including clean hydrogen. And so there's a question around the balance on the balance between setting the policy right on penalty and incentivization. So maybe this is a question to Dr. Rem. How do you set that balance right? And do you think there are areas that need to be worked on in order to set that balance right?
Yes, thank you, Tammy, for this question. I guess, of course, as we see some of these more long-term policy instruments that will be vital. So we're talking here about carbon prices, which are needed, which we already have today in several regions, countries, that can to some extent help to penalize the current unabated production of hydrogen, also the use of fossil fuels in different sectors. But I guess it doesn't really provide or fully close the cost gap that we see today in using low carbon hydrogen in different areas, whether it's long distance, whether it's transport, whether it's heavy industries. So I guess we, at least to some extent, over the next, let's say, 10 years, we still need at least further policy instruments that reduce investment risk for investors, for industry, for financing institutions we just talked about, and that way, provide certainty. So there we're talking, for examples what we see in California with the low carbon fuel standard, with mandates, quotas. So, for example, India is looking into introducing quotas, for example, for the refining sectors, for the fertilizer industry. So that way, providing incentives and creating demand for low carbon hydrogen in these sectors. And I guess we really need to be pragmatic about that. We need, to some extent, penalties like CO2 price, like this kind of very global instruments, but also really have to look at particular sectors and areas to further provide to close the cost gap that we see today between fossil fuels and low carbon hydrogen.
Thanks very much, Dr. Remme. Mathieu, you want to chip in? Okay.
Yeah, if I can add to that, I think we've been discussing the cost of hydrogen, and I don't have a crystal ball, but when we look at the cost curve, in order for this green hydrogen to be competitive, we mentioned a few parameters, energy, we mentioned the cost of CO2 to compare with something reliable. So by 2030, 2035, at one point, the gray, the blue, and the green curves are going to cross each other. So we have 10 years to act and to make sure that we have a system or a frame that works. And I think if we take the example of Europe, we do have a systemic frame that is very difficult to implement, but that is putting together or acting on the right levels. So you've got Fit for 55 at the top with a clear objective to reduce the greenhouse gas emission at the scale of Europe. And then you need to activate several things: the taxonomy, the ETSs, the carbon border adjustment mechanism, RED 2 or RED 3 that are going to drive the refueling industry and the likes. And then you have the IPCEI, so the important project of common European interest, to fund this project. And so if we do that in the next 5 to 10 years, eventually we'll be ready for the next period where hydrogen will be mature enough and scaled up enough to play its key role. But I think we need to go back to this systemic approach. Thinking project by project is nice, but you can always fund one project or justify it. I think it's more the global scheme that we need to think of between public and private.
Thank you, Mr. Gérard. So we got really like 1 to 2 minutes left. So very quickly, each of you, starting with you, Dr. Remme, if you had one wish in terms of the actions we need to take over the next few years to help the global hydrogen economy take off, what would be that wish?
Which would be, we're talking now about a lot of the attention is focusing on the production of low carbon hydrogen. And I guess still often the demand or the users are being neglected. So I guess it's important also from the policy side, despite these announcements of in these national strategies that we see that are quite encouraging, but also not to forget about creating further developed technologies on the end use side, particularly for some of these hard to abate sectors like aviation, shipping, heavy industries.
All right, so let's not forget about demand. Yamazaki-san, one wish?
Okay. Yeah, about if there are net zero master plans on each region with the best configurations, this will be the framework that we can kickstart and speed up about opening the door of the hydrogen economy. That is always my wish. And that is also the goal that we would like to produce and create together with government, industry player, and also with the people and citizen.
Very well. And Mathieu, very small wish because we really have few seconds left.
One wish: use the next 5 years to synchronize supply, demand, and policies in order to make sure that you are ready by 2030.
Synchronization. All right, thank you. Itomi.
Synchronization. Great. Thank you very much to the speakers for this exciting discussion. 45 minutes clearly does not do any justice to all of the efforts of the speakers here or the institutions involved in this emerging hydrogen sector. So thank you, and thanks everyone for joining this session and for the great questions. And we see many other interesting topics, so please enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you.
Welcome back here to the MC studio during this third day of the fourth edition of the Paris Peace Forum. As we've said before, the projects are the real star here. They are at the core, they are at the center of the Paris Peace Forum project in general. And so we'd like to talk with Trisha, we'd like to talk a bit about the Space for Solutions, the 80 projects that we've selected so far. Let me just give you a few numbers and then we'll introduce you to a project leader. Over the course of the last 3 years, we've had 333 projects that have been presented, that have been showcased at the forum, plus the 80 of this year. So we are above 400 projects that we've tried to help to put on the spotlight to support. And as you know, we have the SCUP mechanism by which we support 10 of them throughout the year. So over 3 years, 30 projects plus the 10 that will be announced later today during the closing ceremony from 4:30 to 5:30, where we'll have this announcement. I'm taking the opportunity to thank very warmly the more than 30 SCUP mentors that have been helping the projects at the SCUP. And I'd like to name 3 of them because they've been so fantastic. One is Catherine Lawrence from GIZ, who has been instrumental in pushing forward this project. Second one is Stefano Manservisi, who's been a real help to the forum and is actually an advisor to the president of the Paris Peace Forum. And lastly, Alex Schutzman, who's now in New York, who was in Brussels before, and who has been a force for pushing for these projects throughout these years. And of course, you, Trisha, you've been a SCUP mentor as well. But since you're already on the spotlight, I thought I would draw your attention to Catherine, Stefano, and Alex.
Thank you. And I did not bribe him to say that. We spoke to you, I think, yesterday about a journey of one of our projects that was with us on year 1, who now have their own Netflix series, and we're deeply invested in the work that we do at Paris Peace Forum. I want to do a quick cutaway to directly hear from our project leaders about what their journey at Paris Peace Forum has been like. Thank you. And I do want to admit that I don't think we did a good enough job in the last 2 days of directly engaging with the project leaders. We told you about them. We encouraged you to go interact with them. But where we failed was not, having you hear from them directly with us here. And that's what we wanted to do a course correction on. And with that, we have the amazing Eloise who's joined us today. Justin will continue the conversation in French, but I just want to give a quick introduction of the work that they do in English. I believe they were deeply inspired and moved by a conversation that they had with Nobel Peace Laureate Denis Mukwege, who we've had here at the forum too. And they are deeply committed to looking at how can they provide survivors of sexual violence who come from conflict zones therapy to recover from the trauma, which I think is so important because, I do work in the space as well. And more often than not, the conversation is very centered around the perpetrators. And we never talk about survivors and their rehabilitation. So thank you for the work you do. And over to you, Justin, to interview Eloise.
Merci beaucoup, Trisha. Donc, je passe.
Thank you very much, Trish. I'll be speaking French to talk about the Recreation Project. Eloise, talk to us about the project. What's it all about? Well, our project, Recreation, well, first of all, let me thank you for the invitation. Our project, Recreation, is first and foremost a therapy that we created in 2016 after meeting with Dr. Denis Mukwege. The idea is that we provide therapy for women who are survivors of sexual violence, particularly rape used as a weapon of war. Our workshops, 2 hours, we alternate. You've got talking periods and dancing periods. The idea is through dance, women can regain ownership of their bodies after the violence of sexual rape. And this way, they can also express themselves during the talking groups. They can exchange experience amongst themselves. That helps them together move toward reconstruction. What's the region you work in? Well, currently, we're working mainly in France, particularly with the Avicenne Hospital in Saint-Denis. We're also working with prostitutes. Our idea, among others, working in France, is to gauge the impact of our workshops of dance as therapy. Then we can spread this, disseminate it more widely, precisely to train therapists in areas of armed conflict, such as the DRC, Iraq, and other areas. How are you organized? Are you an association? Who began this, and how are you bringing this forward? Yes, we're an association. We're an association set up in 2008, Sabe and Women's Avu. These are two men, two dancers, who really shared these values and got together on this. Then, after meeting with Dr. Denis Mukwege in 2016, we came up with the idea of having a dance-based therapy. Dance is in the genetic makeup of our association. Since the creation of our project, Recreation by Luba, so 2016, 2017. Since then, there are about 10 of us that work on the project every single day. We've got dance as therapy workshops every week, 3 to 4 per week for women. I have a question. I'm curious, how did you hear about the Paris Peace Forum, and how did it occur to you to apply? Because after all, there's a whole application process that starts in the springtime from mid-March, May, early on in the year. It's always interesting to hear how people found out about the project. Well, we heard about you last year. We didn't complete our application last year. This year, then, well, we'd had members of our team that knew various people from the organizing team at the Peace Forum, so we thought it'd be interesting. And amongst your priorities, you got the idea of reaching gender equality. That's crucial to us, very important. Also, the question is, how can we showcase women? We feel we can't reach PACE if there's not gender equality. If we don't focus on that, and if women aren't in the decision-making process. A second thing we wanted to focus on when we applied to the Paris Peace Forum, we wanted to focus on the importance of mental health and addressing mental health to try to produce peace without thinking of the climate crisis, economic crisis, past wars, and their impact, the impact on people's mental health, women's mental health, and children's mental health. We felt this was essential, very important. That's why we felt that dance as therapy fit perfectly in the Paris Peace Forum. Eloise, as project leader, you were one of the 30 that came this year out of the 80 projects. We treated each project equally, but some of them were able to attend. Not everybody can attend due to COVID restrictions. You have been in attendance from the beginning. I'd ask you, were there certain sessions here? You're here, you've been attending the sessions. Are there some sessions or some speakers that were inspiring to you and really had an impact? Yes, among others. It was an important thing to us to be able to network or meet people from the organization. We met with many people. We met with a lot of project leaders. I think that's extremely important to see how we can network, get together with each other, discuss things with each other, meet each other, such as our neighbors, East Montel. So yes, with lots of these sideline discussions, also talking about AI, more feminist type of AI. So this is a perfect location. It's important for the project leaders to get together at this type of venue, to be part of the discussion process. You talked about Catherine Lawrence, who helped me with the SCUP and was the moderator at my panel yesterday. Very important for us to meet with everybody, with each other, to talk about the topics. Question: what happens after the forum? You've established contacts and so forth. What will you do afterwards? The post-forum period. And what's your takeaway from the forum? How will you continue developing your project and disseminating it more broadly? Well, our project, first and foremost, is about recreating a relationship to the world, refusing exclusion and demystification of women. This Paris Peace Forum, as we see it, is a wonderful opportunity to meet with people and to increase our visibility as well. We're going to be working to further increase our visibility and be understood and recognized. We're a young project, a young association. We want to show that we're very much here. We're attending the forum. We can showcase these issues here. So even just in terms of our financial, our funders and so forth, this will be high impact. So yes, after the forum, we'll continue evaluating our therapy and spreading it more widely, disseminating it to areas of conflict, return to the DRC, go to Iraq, Syria, Colombia, precisely so that all the women, survivors of sexual violence, particularly during times of conflict, they can benefit from the therapy.
If you don't understand, just I can translate. Désolée, mon français pas très bien. Mais hier, we had the Minister d'Égalité, Elizabeth Morena, et je pense que you were there and you heard. I just was wondering if you want to reflect on some of the things she said, because, you know, she speaks from a ministry position. Yes. You do the work on ground. So if there's any contrarian point of view, or you want to reflect on something, or if you want to have a message to send to the Minister d'Égalité, en français, c'est bon, hein?
Thank you. Non,
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Absolutely. You've said it beautifully. We are field workers, and we wish to receive support as field workers. There are many of us working every single day with women survivors of sexual violence. We want support to increase our visibility. Yesterday, Madame Morano precisely did talk about issues pertaining to how we can get further involvement of men in this whole process, in this shared fight against violence perpetrated against women. With LOBA, we're working to deconstruct the male image and proposing workshops so that together with men we can work on gender equality. Well, when you talk about deconstructing, I hope you mean deconstructing the representation of men and not men themselves. I suspect that's true. At any rate, let me specify that regarding Ms. Moreno's panel. We had several men whom we'd invited to the panel. Theoretically, at the forum, we try to make sure we don't have all men panels, nor all women panels. We tend to want to have panels with both men and women taking part. That's what we'd foreseen originally, but several men then were not able to attend specific panels, and that's why that particular panel ended up being women only. But I believe that it was a very interesting panel meeting, panel session, and very important ideas were voiced.
Be the people watching, do you need some support for your organization? Et si oui, je pense oui, hein, c'est pas facile pour faire comme what you're doing. So maybe you can ask the audience what is the support you need, et aussi if you can tell them what is your website, what is your social media, how they can follow you, and no more.
Thank you very much. Bien sûr, non, ben.
Yes, absolutely. Our main needs, well, fairly straightforward. Firstly, we need support. We need to enter into partnerships. We need financial support so that we can continue moving further afield. This is essential for an association and for project leaders. Social networks, our website, it's Recreation by Luba. You can find this on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and our website. Thanks so much. Thank you. Eloise Unumba Bessonnet, project leader for Recreation, one of our projects. We're very pleased to have met with you here at our little studio with Trish. Just a couple of brief announcements now.
To English now, to do a couple of announcements for what follows. At this very moment, we have a session that just started on the Observatoire Information et Démocratie, which is a sort of IPCC for information and freedom of the press, with Angel Gurria, the former Secretary General for OECD, Christophe Deloire, the head of Reporters Without Borders, and Shoshana Zuboff from Harvard. And so that's another initiative that is launched in the framework of the Information and Democracy Initiative. But we'll have other panels, including, at the end of the day, the closing ceremony.
Yes, yes. Do you just want to give a quick shout out to your colleague who is here? Peut-être, just her name?
Miranda, yes, my colleague just here is Miranda Brown. She's responsible of the engagement pole.
Oh, donc, okay, so merci beaucoup. Please follow the projects. We've had amazing Eloise here, but we have 80 other projects that you can explore on the platform. You can video call them directly to know more about their work. So please do that. We encourage you. Today is the last day you can do so. Thank you, Eloise, and thank you
very much.
Thank you. Merci encore d'être venu, and we'll be back.
Thank you for coming.